Take off your wedding dress. You will never have my heart. He said it like a verdict, cold, final, irreversible. She was just the nanny, a quiet woman who arrived during a storm and somehow became the calm inside one. He was Manhattan's most ruthless magnate, untouchable, broken, magnificent in his cruelty. She never planned to fall. He never planned to feel. But between them stood a little girl who called her mommy, and a man terrified of the word home. If this story already has your heart aching, subscribe to the channel and leave your like. It truly keeps these stories alive. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. I'd love to know you're here. The elevator doors parted, and Clara walked in carrying a worn leather bag and something harder to name. The quiet kind of steadiness that nobody notices until it's already holding a room together. Manhattan was being punished outside. Rain came down in walls against the floor-to-ceiling glass, and the city had dissolved into smeared amber and wet dark. Inside the penthouse, everything was the precise opposite of weather. Marble that reflected light with unsettling perfection. Furniture that looked chosen by someone who understood beauty and had no use for warmth. The silence wasn't accidental. It had been arranged. A woman in a charcoal blazer appeared from a side corridor, clipboard in hand, expression already at a verdict. Miss Simmons, not a greeting, a confirmation. Mr. Whitmore's expectations are high. The last nanny left without notice. A pause, just long enough to land. Luna hasn't said much since. He wants to meet you first. Clara followed her down a hallway, hung with abstract art, angular, airless, nothing on the walls that could be called soft, until the space opened into a living room where a fire burned low and mean in a stone fireplace. He was standing at the window. Arthur Whitmore had his back to the room, a glass of something dark held loosely in one hand, watching the storm the way men watch things they've already decided they can't control. His suit was immaculate despite the hour. His shoulders carried tension like it was structural, not temporary. Like it had been there so long he'd forgotten it wasn't just part of him. When he turned, his eyes moved over her, not with curiosity, with measurement. "You're younger than I expected," he said. "You're colder than I expected." The words left her mouth before she could stop them. Something moved across his face. Not offense. Something quieter and faster than that, gone before she could place it. "Luna is 6, he said, as if the previous exchange hadn't occurred. "She has a routine. Disruptions aren't something I tolerate. The schedule is on the tablet in your room." He turned back to the glass. "Follow it." "Understood." He said nothing else. The dismissal was architectural, absolute, built into the way he angled his body away. Clara didn't move immediately. Not out of defiance, exactly. She'd heard something. Barely a sound. More like the suggestion of one. A soft drag of feet against marble somewhere down the hall. She turned. A small girl stood at the corridor's edge in yellow pajamas, dotted with tiny stars. Dark hair loose and tangled from sleep. Eyes so wide and careful they seemed to be running calculations. She wasn't frightened, she was deciding. "Hi," Clara crouched, bringing herself level. "I'm Clara." Luna didn't answer. She looked for another moment, assessing, unhurried, and then walked forward and placed her hand inside Clara's. No ceremony, no hesitation. Like the decision had already been made somewhere deeper than words. Clara's chest did something she didn't quite expect. She didn't look back at Arthur, but she felt the quality of the room change behind her, felt his attention shift the way temperature shifts when a door opens somewhere. Luna pulled her toward the fireplace. They sat together on the rug, the girl pointing at things around the room in silence while Clara named them low, barely above a whisper. And somehow it became a game without either of them declaring it won. The fire spat softly. Rain dragged itself in long streaks down the glass. At some point, Clara couldn't have said exactly when, Luna laughed. A small sound surprised out of her, like she'd forgotten it was an option. Arthur hadn't moved. He was still telling himself he was watching the storm. It was the simpler story. The true one, the one he wasn't examining, was the way Clara tucked the child's hair back without being asked. The way her laugh, when it came, had no performance in it. Nothing calculated. Just real and low and entirely unaware of him. That was the thing that unsettled him most. She wasn't performing for his approval. He set down his glass and walked out. His footsteps were even, deliberate, the walk of a man who has decided something, though he couldn't have said what. At the hallway's edge, he paused, a fraction of a second, no more. Luna's voice drifted from the fireplace. One word, a name. Clara. He didn't react. He moved to his office, closed the door without sound, and sat in the dark with the rain loud against the glass and something quieter, more inconvenient, moving through him slowly. The strange, unwelcome sensation that the penthouse, for the first time in a very long time, did not feel entirely like an empty place. He stayed with that feeling longer than he intended. He still hadn't named it by morning. The call came on a Tuesday. Arthur took it standing, which was how he took most things. Still, shoulders set, giving the impression of a man who had already processed whatever was coming before it arrived. But when he ended the call, he didn't move for a while. Just stood there with the phone loose in his hand and the city doing its indifferent thing 40 floors below. The tabloids had found something. A photo, a source, a pulled thread. The specifics didn't matter. What mattered was the word his lawyer used twice in the same sentence: instability. The custody arrangement for Luna had been fragile for 18 months, kept intact mostly through expensive legal maneuvering and Arthur's stubborn precision. Now there was a new crack in it. They're constructing a narrative, his lawyer said. Single father, high staff turnover, a child with documented developmental concerns. A pause with weight in it. A stable two-parent household would change the entire picture. Arthur asked very few questions after that. Clara found out the same afternoon, not from him, from a document slid across the kitchen island by the assistant, whose name she still hadn't been given, delivered with the emotional register of someone handing over a gas bill. She read it once, looked up, read it again. A contract marriage. She said it toward the counter, not at anyone. Arthur was in the doorway. Jacket off, one collar button open, the most undone she'd ever seen him. He didn't react to the words. Temporary, legally structured. He glanced at his phone, set it face down. You'd be compensated, generously. You're describing a business arrangement, yes, flat, final. She looked at him, really looked, at the careful blankness of his expression, the way he was holding himself like a man waiting for a negotiation to conclude. And if I say no? Something moved in his jaw, almost nothing. Then I find someone else who says yes, and Luna loses the one person she's actually responded to. He held her gaze without apology. I'm not asking you to feel anything about it. I'm asking you to sign. The pen was already on the counter. She signed. The ceremony was 4 days later, a registrar's office that had been quietly staged, white florals, warm lighting, a cluster of pre-approved press contacts arranged on the steps outside like part of the decor. Arthur's publicist had produced the whole thing with the bloodless efficiency of a brand event. Clara wore ivory, simple cut, no embellishments, nothing that asked to be remembered. She'd done her own hair in the penthouse bathroom with the door locked, listening to Luna hum something formless and sweet on the other side of it, and she had made a private agreement with herself not to think too carefully about what the day actually was. It lasted 11 minutes. Arthur said the required words. Clara said hers. When the registrar nodded toward the kiss, Arthur turned to her, and she had braced herself for something performative, something calculated for the cameras. But he leaned in, and his lips met the corner of her cheek, close enough to her mouth that she felt the warmth of it in a way she hadn't prepared for. Brief, deliberate, gone. She kept her expression neutral, felt something go hollow inside her chest and kept that neutral too. Luna, wedged between Arthur's assistant and an unfortunately placed potted fern, waved at Clara with both hands like she was flagging down a rescue boat. Clara's mouth almost moved. Almost. The suite was the kind of hotel room that cost more per night than most people's monthly rent and had been designed, seemingly, to make solitude feel like a lifestyle choice. The champagne nobody had ordered was sweating on the console table. The bed was enormous and untouched and somehow accusatory. Arthur went straight to the window. Clara stood in the middle of the room in her ivory dress, shoes already off, not quite sure which direction to move in. Take the bedroom, he said, to the glass. I'll stay in the other room. Okay. The city 38 floors below produced its usual ambient hum. Someone's helicopter crossed the skyline. Neither of them spoke. Then he turned, and something had shifted in his face. Not open, nothing like open, but deliberate in a new way. Like he'd spent the drive here deciding on something and had arrived at it. "Take off your wedding dress." His voice was low, measured, the voice he used in boardrooms when he wanted something to be understood precisely and not interpreted generously. "You will never have my heart. What happened today was a legal arrangement. That's the whole of it." The words were cold the way marble is cold, beautiful, total, not designed for human warmth. Clara didn't look away. She gave him 3 full seconds of direct eye contact and felt the back of her throat close slightly and didn't let any of it reach her face. "I know," she said quietly. "I never thought I would." She walked to the bedroom, closed the door. Not a slam, not a statement, just a door closing. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dim light and pressed both palms flat against her thighs and breathed with the focused intention of someone talking themselves down from a ledge. The tightness in her throat was something she refused to name. She wasn't going to cry. Not about this. Not tonight. What she kept turning over, what she couldn't set down, was the pause. The small, almost invisible pause before he'd said it. Not the words themselves, but what preceded them, like he'd needed to build armor before speaking, like something had required defending against. She didn't know what to do with that. So she sat with it in the dark until her breathing steadied, and the city outside went on being exactly what it always was. The knock came just after 2, so soft she thought she'd imagined it. She opened the door and found Luna in the hallway, star-print pajamas, hair loose, holding Clara's wedding veil pressed against her chest with both arms, the simple tulle she'd left draped over the armchair in the sitting room. The child had found it, had carried it here in the dark. Luna didn't explain, didn't try to. She just looked up with those wide, ancient eyes and held the veil a little tighter, like she was keeping it safe from something. Clara's chest cracked open quietly. She crouched down and opened her arms, and Luna came into them the way she always did, immediate, total, no conditions, and Clara closed her eyes and held her and felt the tightness in her throat return as something different this time. Not grief, something more complicated. At the far end of the hallway, barely a shape in the dark, Arthur stood, still dressed, hadn't slept. He watched Clara hold his daughter without moving, without making a sound, and whatever had lived in his expression since the ceremony, that deliberate, armored blankness, had gone somewhere. What replaced it was harder to describe. Quieter. Worse. He stood with it for a long time. Then he turned and walked back into the dark, and the hallway was empty, and the city kept its noise to itself. Nobody had warned Clara about the texture of it, not the hostility that she'd expected, had prepared small defenses against. What she hadn't anticipated was this, the strange, unnamed weight of 2 people occupying the same space without any agreed-upon language for what that space was. Arthur left before 7 most mornings, returned after 9, communicated primarily through Patricia and through texts so efficiently worded they could have been generated by scheduling software. Luna's appointment Thursday at 4. Car will be ready. Kitchen staff off Sundays. Approved restaurant list on the tablet. Clara looked at the restaurant list once. Then she opened the kitchen cabinets. The first Sunday she made pancakes, partly because Luna had appeared in the kitchen doorway with an expression of such transparent, concentrated hoping that denying it felt like a small cruelty. Partly, she could admit this privately, because something in her had wanted to put something warm and irreversible into this apartment. Luna poured the batter. Most of it landed on the counter. They cleaned it up while laughing, and Clara was on her knees wiping flour from the cabinet door when she heard the kitchen go quiet and looked up to find Arthur in the doorway in his running clothes, taking in the scene, the handprints on the cabinet, the general disaster of it, the 2 of them still catching their breath from laughing. Something moved across his face. He filed it away before she could read it. "There's a list." "I know about the list." Clara stood, wrung out the cloth, turned back to the stove. He didn't leave. That was the part she noticed. He stood there another moment, and when she glanced back, He was watching Luna press blueberries into her pancake with the slow deliberateness of someone constructing something important. His expression was unreadable in the specific way that meant it was being kept that way. He left without eating. That afternoon, she found a second plate in the sink, rinsed clean, set aside with the care of someone who hadn't wanted it noticed. She put it away and said nothing. The winter garden had been Luna's discovery. A glass-enclosed room off the east corridor, overlooked, locked since... Clara pieced this together, mostly from the way Patricia's face rearranged itself whenever it came up. Since Arthur's wife died, it had the particular stillness of a place that used to be loved and had since been preserved rather than inhabited. Clean, careful, airless. Luna had found the key in a kitchen drawer and brought it to Clara in both hands, solemn as a ceremony. They spent 3 days on it. Bags of soil dragged from a garden centre 4 blocks away, small herb pots lined along the new shelving. Clara installed herself with a YouTube tutorial and a drill she found in a utility closet. 2 lemon trees arrived via elevator on a flatbed dolly and caused Patricia visible distress. Luna arranged everything by colour, which made no horticultural sense and looked completely right. Arthur found them there on a Thursday. Late afternoon, the winter light going grey outside the glass, a small lamp on, Clara's phone propped against a pot playing something with acoustic guitar, and no urgency. Luna was labelling pots in her large, effortful handwriting. Clara was cross-legged on the flagstone helping her spell Romero. He stood in the doorway long enough that Luna looked up. She held out a pot, Mentor, in letters that got progressively larger toward the end. "I did the writing. I can see that." His voice landed differently in here, quieter, less composed somehow, like the room had taken something off him without asking. "It's, He looked at the pot. "Good." Clara kept her eyes on the label she was writing. Romero. R-O-M-E-R-O. She did not smile. Mostly. "The lemon trees are on the left because that's the morning light," she said. "Herbs in the middle so she can reach." A pause, she looked up. "I should have asked before doing all this. It didn't occur to me until we were already halfway through." Arthur looked around the room slowly. At the plants, the handwriting, the lamp throwing its small warm circle. Luna now watering something with the focus of someone who'd been given a very serious responsibility and intended to honor it. His daughter, in this room that had been locked for 2 years, completely absorbed in something alive. "No." His voice was careful. "It's fine." Not, "It's good." Not, "Thank you." Clara clocked the exact distance between where he was and where "thank you" lived and said nothing about it. "Extra soil on the 3rd shelf," she offered, turning back to the pots. He stayed another minute. She was aware of it the way you're aware of weather changing, not seeing it directly, just feeling the pressure shift. Then his footsteps retreated down the corridor, and her lungs did something they'd apparently been holding off on. Luna looked up from her watering can. Why does Papa always stand in doorways? Clara thought about it genuinely. I think he's making decisions.
Why does Papa always
About what?
stand in doorways?
I'm still working that out. Luna considered this, then went back to watering.
I think he's making
Clara
decisions.
went back to the labels. The guitar kept playing. Outside the glass, the city moved through its grey Thursday afternoon, indifferent to all of it. The Paris Gala was Patricia's idea, framed as a necessity. Visibility, she'd called it. The narrative needs maintenance. Clara had not pointed out that she found that sentence deeply strange.
It's absolutely
She found the dress
perfect.
herself.
It certainly
Floor-length
is,
black,
darling.
structured
It
at the
looks
shoulders,
just like
in a
you.
way that needed nothing added to it. Luna had spotted it through a boutique window 2 streets from the hotel, while Arthur was in a meeting that had already run 40 minutes over. She'd pointed at it with the immediate certainty she reserved for things she'd already decided. That one.
The
Clara
ambiance
hadn't
tonight
argued.
is simply
The venue
exquisite.
was a privately rented hotel, particularly
Indeed,
in the 7th.
they truly
the kind of
captured the
building that made
grandeur
you
of
feel
the
like
space.
history was watching. Gilded moldings, candlelight that softened everything into amber, an orchestra tucked into an antechamber, playing something that hovered at the edge of a waltz without quite committing. Arthur was waiting in the entrance hall when Clara came down with Luna, who was being transferred to Patricia for the evening with the solemn gravity of a diplomatic handoff. He'd been looking at his phone. He looked up. The half-second before his expression arranged itself was enough. His jaw shifted. His eyes moved over her once, quickly, controlled, and then he was perfectly composed again, phone back in his jacket pocket, face back to its default setting of nothing you're supposed to notice. "You're on time," he said. "Were you hoping I wouldn't be?" Something almost happened at the corner of his mouth. He offered his arm. Outside, the evening was cool and smelled of old
You're
stone
on time.
and something floral drifting from a
hoping I
courtyard
wouldn't be?
somewhere nearby. Clara took his arm and felt the solidity of him under her hand and kept her breathing even, and her expression pleasantly neutral, which was becoming a skill she'd developed specifically for situations involving this man. Inside, it was performance and crystal, and the specific energy of rooms where everyone is watching everyone else while pretending not to. Arthur moved through it like he'd been born to it, unhurried, slightly removed, the kind of man other men made space for without being asked. Clara stayed within convincing distance and talked to people and found, genuinely, a sculptor from Lyon with silver earrings and a story about an installation that had collapsed at a Berlin opening that made her laugh
I told you it was a
properly
ridiculous
for the first
story.
time all evening.
It
She'd been
is,
so
but the way you
absorbed,
tell it,
she'd almost forgotten where she
I can't
was.
breathe.
Almost.
This evening is
The
perfect,
Italian
isn't
found
it?
her during the second hour.
It really is.
Marco, introduced
Especially
by a
this
mutual
conversation.
contact. Private equity, broad shoulders, the particular warmth of someone who'd decided to be charming and was good at it. He asked about things she actually cared about. He listened. When he touched her forearm briefly to emphasize a point about
You see,
contemporary
that's what I admire
architecture,
about your
it
perspective.
was
You
easy and
always
natural
find the silver
and meant
lining.
nothing at all.
Well, someone has to look
Across
on the
the
bright
room,
side, don't you
Arthur
think?
went silent, mid-sentence. The man he'd been talking to, a Frankfurt banker who would later describe the interaction as strange, noticed the direction of Arthur's gaze and found somewhere else to
Distinguished
be.
guests,
The
friends.
orchestra shifted into something slower.
I just wanted to say
Clara
a few
was
words
mid-sentence
about...
when Arthur materialized at her elbow, with the timing of a man who'd been waiting for precisely this opening. The formal remarks. He addressed this to the middle distance. "We should be closer to the front."
Please excuse
Marco
me, I see
smiled
someone
the
I must
smile of
greet.
someone who understood exactly what was happening and was too sophisticated to acknowledge it. He excused himself with grace. Arthur's hand settled at the small of her back as he moved her through the crowd. Not a
You were
grip,
watching me.
just presence, warm and deliberate through the fabric.
You were watching
And she
me.
felt it travel all the way up her spine in a way she had no interest in examining. "You were watching me," she said quietly. "I was watching the room. Those aren't different things." They stopped near the dance floor. And
Everyone
before
else
Clara had
seems
quite
to have
registered the
disappeared.
transition, his hand had moved from her back to her waist,
It's
and
just
his other
us
hand
now.
had taken hers, and they were moving, not quite dancing, too slow for that, too close. And the chandelier light broke into fragments across the floor around them. She could smell him. Cedar,
You didn't like him.
something underneath it. The particular warmth of a person she'd been living beside for weeks without permission to notice. She
Welcome,
noticed now.
everyone, to the
Neither of them
annual
spoke for a
philanthropic
moment.
gala.
Her hand was on his shoulder.
We are honored to
and she
have
was
you
very
here tonight
precisely aware
as we
of not
celebrate.
tilting her head the fraction it would take to close the remaining distance between her temple and his jaw. "You didn't like him," she said finally. "I don't know him." Arthur. He looked down at her, and there it was, just briefly, just a crack. Something unguarded, almost angry at itself for being visible, real in a way his face rarely allowed. Then he stepped back, clean, deliberate, the movement of someone who'd caught themselves at the edge of something and retreated with precision. "The remarks are starting." He released her hand, turned toward the stage. Clara stayed where she was for a moment, the chandelier doing its slow scatter across the floor, her pulse doing something she was firmly not acknowledging. She didn't look at him, but she felt from across the room the particular quality of his attention, that specific, careful way he was not looking at her. Somehow that was the loudest thing in the room. Venice in November had no interest in being romantic. It smelled of cold stone and brackish water, and sometimes inexplicably, something faintly sweet drifting from a bakery that was never where you expected it. The city didn't perform for tourists in the off-season. It just existed, heavy, ancient, slightly indifferent. They arrived Wednesday evening. Luna had been asleep since the airport, her cheek warm and damp against Clara's shoulder in the water taxi, one hand loosely gripping the fabric of Clara's sleeve, even in sleep. Arthur sat across from them, laptop open, speaking low Italian into his phone. At some point his eyes moved to them, to Luna's slack, trusting weight against Clara, and stayed there a beat too long before he looked back at the screen. He didn't say anything. He rarely did when something caught him. The hotel was a palazzo on the Grand Canal. Ceilings that made you feel the accumulated weight of centuries. Rose-colored drapes, the shade of something faded and deliberate. Dark wood that smelled faintly of beeswax. Their suite had the usual geography. 2 bedrooms, a sitting room between them, enough architecture to maintain whatever they were pretending. Arthur had meetings starting the next morning. Clara had the city, the better arrangement clearly. They hit the Rialto at dawn, while the market was still being set up, and the light came in sideways off the water. A vendor gave Luna a clementine without being asked, just pressed it into her hands with a prego and a shrug, and Luna told Clara afterward that Venice was the best place on earth. They walked every bridge she pointed at. They took a gondola that Luna abandoned after 12 minutes in favor of a traghetto. €2, she explained with complete seriousness, was simply smarter. Clara let her lead. It was genuinely the best way to see anything. The masquerade was the 3rd night. Private ball, Palazzo 3 canals over, the kind of event that existed on no public calendar and required the particular altitude of Arthur's social world to access. Masks weren't suggested. They were the point. Clara had found hers in a shop near the Frari, ivory and gold, nothing excessive. She wore it with a rose gown she'd bought almost by accident. Luna had stopped in front of the boutique window and said that one with the finality she reserved for things she'd already decided, and Clara had gone inside before thinking it through. The candlelight in the palazzo did something to the fabric she hadn't predicted. Arthur was already dressed when she came out of the bedroom. Black suit, black mask pushed up on his forehead, jacket perfectly fitted in the way of someone who'd never worn anything that didn't fit. He looked at her, and whatever happened in his face happened quickly. A fractional shift, controlled almost immediately, and then he was composed again and looking somewhere past her shoulder. "Ready," he said. Not a question. Inside the palazzo, the air smelled of beeswax candles and old stone and the perfume of 200 guests. Frescoed ceilings, a string quartet somewhere above, candlelight turning every surface amber. The masks did something strange to the social atmosphere, loosened it, gave it permission to be something other than performance. Arthur stayed close the first hour, not hovering, just nearby. That particular gravitational quality he had. Then someone claimed him near the far doors, and Clara drifted toward the windows. She met Emilio there, silver mask, a laugh that arrived before his sentences did, immediately and genuinely interested in the architecture of the ceiling in a way that had nothing to do with impressing anyone. He asked about her, actually listened to the answers. When he touched her hand briefly, making a point about something, it was easy and unloaded and completely ordinary. She'd forgotten what ordinary felt like. Across the room, Arthur's sentence stopped. He resumed it, automatically, the word still technically correct, while his attention had gone somewhere else entirely, watching Emilio lean toward her slightly, watching the way she tilted her head back when she laughed. Something contracted in his chest without asking his permission first. He ended the conversation with an abruptness that left the other man visibly uncertain what had just happened. Clara heard the footsteps. She'd learned them without intending to. The particular rhythm, the weight of them. "We should circulate." Arthur's voice landed somewhere between her and Emilio, belonging to neither. Emilio understood immediately. He kissed her hand, slowly, with a small private smile that was absolutely directed at Arthur, and disappeared into the crowd like smoke. Arthur walked. Clara followed because staying wasn't an option she'd worked out yet. They ended up on a narrow bridge over a side canal, the party reduced to a muffled warmth behind palazzo walls, torchlight scattered across water so dark it looked solid. The cold was immediate and complete out here. Clara crossed her arms, her breath visible in small bursts. "You did that on purpose," she said. "It was time to move. You'd been watching me for 10 minutes. Silence. He looked at the canal. His jaw was doing that thing, the small contained tightening she'd catalogued by now without meaning to. "He touched your hand," he said. Quiet, flat, like the words had gotten out before he'd approved them. Clara looked at his profile, the torchlight at the edge of his jaw, the mask still pushed up on his forehead. the exhaustion that lived in him underneath everything else. Not tonight's exhaustion, the other kind. He was being friendly. I know that. Then what? He turned. The bridge was narrow enough that the turn brought him closer than she'd accounted for. His hand came up and found her arm, above the elbow, fingers curling lightly, not restraining, more like someone reaching for something solid without quite knowing they were doing it. His eyes met hers, and something was there that his face didn't usually permit, unguarded, almost bewildered by itself. Her ribs tightened, nothing to do with temperature. His gaze moved down. Just once. Came back. A boat passed below, slow and quiet, its wake spreading in dark rings. The torch behind them shuddered. He let go, stepped back, one step. The bridge didn't allow more. And his hands went into his pockets. She'd learned that too. The pockets meant he was putting something away. We should go in, it's cold. Arthur? It's cold. Quieter this time, almost gentle, which was somehow worse. She looked at him for a moment that lasted longer than either of them acknowledged. The armor was back, almost complete, almost. She turned and walked toward the warm light spilling from the palazzo doors, her arm still holding the ghost of his fingers, her pulse doing something she was firmly categorizing as irrelevant. Behind her, she counted 4 full seconds before she heard it. A slow exhale, long, effortful, the kind that comes from somewhere deeper than just breathing. She kept walking, didn't look back. Couldn't, really, not without everything changing. The Swiss Alps in December didn't comfort you. They just existed, massive and indifferent, while you worked out your problems underneath them. Snow had been falling since they arrived. Not dramatically, just steadily, the way things fall when they have nowhere to be. The resort sat at an elevation that required a private gondola to reach, which Luna had treated as the best part of the entire trip. She'd fogged the glass with her breath the whole ascent and drawn small figures in the condensation. A house, a sun, something that might have been a dog or possibly a cloud. Arthur had watched the mountain. Clara had watched Luna. His silences had been changing lately. She'd noticed without letting herself think too hard about what that meant. Less like a door closed, more like one that wasn't quite latched. The chalet was the kind of luxury that didn't announce itself. Heated stone floors, cashmere folded at the foot of each bed, a fireplace you could practically walk into. Outside, a private slope dropped from the terrace toward a groomed trail below, and Luna had pointed at it the moment they arrived, with the expression of someone who had already made a decision. She wanted to ski, first thing, obviously. She'd had 2 lessons the previous winter, and retained none of the technique and all of the conviction, which Clara had come to understand was simply Luna's relationship with the physical world. Arthur handed her off to the resort's ski instructor, a Swiss man named Tobias with the patient eyes of someone who had shepherded many fearless small children, and took his call inside. 2 hours, 11 falls. Luna got up from every single one with the same look, briefly indignant, immediately ready. And by the end she was carving small, wobbling turns that made Tobias nod with genuine approval. Clara skied alongside her, watching her, and felt the particular quiet joy of witnessing someone be entirely, unself-consciously themselves. The fall happened on the path back, stone, shaded, a patch of ice the morning sun hadn't found. Luna went down before anyone could reach her, fast and sudden and wrong, and the sound she made was sharp and then immediately nothing, which was somehow worse than crying. Clara was beside her in seconds, hands already moving, voice already steady, the steadiness entirely performed. The resort doctor said bruised wrist, possible minor sprain. Ice pack, rest, no more skiing. Luna was stoic through the examination the way children are stoic when they're saving it. Clara held her hand the entire time and kept her face calm and waited until Luna was looking at the ceiling before she let her own fingers tighten around nothing. The fever arrived by evening. Nothing serious, the doctor said. Cold air, shock, the simple fragility of a small body. Rest, fluids. Clara sat on the edge of Luna's bed while the snow continued its slow work outside. The room held the smell of eucalyptus from a diffuser she'd found in the bathroom, and something warmer underneath it, the specific scent of a child's hair, sleepy and clean. She'd put on a playlist, Soft instrumental things. No words. She changed the cloth on Luna's forehead, brought water, sat back down. Somewhere past midnight she started singing, a song her mother had sung, one she hadn't thought about in years, the words surfacing before she'd consciously reached for them. Her voice was quiet. The mountains outside were dark and enormous and completely silent. Luna's fingers tightened around hers just after 2. Her eyes opened, unfocused, fever-soft, present in the partial way of someone between sleep and waking who needs to confirm something without knowing what. "Mama," she breathed, barely a word, more like the shape of one. Clara stopped breathing. The thing that moved through her didn't have a clean name. Not grief, not happiness. Something that lived in the space where those two things press against each other. She didn't correct her. The word was already gone. Luna already sinking back under, fingers loosening slowly. Clara stayed exactly where she was. Didn't move for a long time. She didn't know Arthur was in the doorway, didn't hear him. He made no sound, did nothing to announce himself. But he'd been there long enough. The doorframe held the shape of him, still and upright, and whatever the word had done to her, it had done something different and perhaps more destructive to him. She found that out later. Just after 3, she needed air in the way that isn't really about air. The balcony was narrow and the cold was immediate and total. The Alps at that hour didn't negotiate. She hadn't grabbed a coat. Stood there anyway with her arms pulled tight around herself, looking at the darkness where she knew the mountains were even though she couldn't see them. She heard the door. Then, warmth. His coat dropped over her shoulders from behind. It still held the heat of him, that specific warmth of fabric worn close to a body, and her eyes closed briefly before she could stop them. His hand stayed at her shoulders after, not holding, not releasing, just there. She didn't turn around. He didn't step back. The snow fell between them and the dark, slow and without urgency, each flake catching what little light existed before disappearing into the white below. She could feel him behind her, not touching now, his hands finally dropped, but close enough that the cold couldn't fully reach her back. She thought about speaking, couldn't locate a single sentence that wouldn't break something. Down the mountain, a single light moved through the snow. A groomer, probably. Slow and purposeful, preparing the slope for a morning that felt very far away. They watched it until it disappeared. Neither of them moved to go inside. The flowers showed up on a Tuesday with no explanation. Yellow roses, still cold from outside, wrapped in brown paper that left a faint, damp ring on the kitchen counter. No card. Clara stood there in her socks, looking at them while her coffee brewed, and when Patricia appeared, she asked, and Patricia said she didn't know anything about it, with the particular blankness of someone who'd been instructed not to. Arthur's cup was already rinsed in the rack. He'd been gone at least an hour. She put the roses in a vase and said nothing. The second time it was burgundy, almost bruised-looking, the kind of red that's nearly not red anymore, left on her desk in the study where she'd been spending her evenings. She'd mentioned that author once, weeks ago in passing, and the novel appeared outside her door 2 days later. No note. That evening Arthur passed her in the hallway and gave her the same brief nod he always gave her, eyes already moving past, and went into his office and closed the door most of the way. Most of the way, not all of it. She started noticing the architecture of his small gestures after that. Coffee at the right temperature on the mornings. She looked tired, not something she'd asked for, not something anyone had arranged, just there. The way his office light stayed on past midnight, on the nights she stayed up late and went off not long after hers did. The way he'd started pausing in doorways, slightly longer before walking away. She noticed. She built no conclusions. She was becoming practiced at that particular discipline. The concert was a Thursday evening, a small auditorium at Luna's school that smelled of floor wax and someone's takeout, and the concentrated hope of 36-year-olds who'd been rehearsing for 3 weeks. Luna performed with the intensity of someone defusing something. She received a yellow ribbon afterward and wore it for the rest of the night with complete seriousness. She was asleep before they hit the FDR, head against the window, ribbon still pinned slightly crooked to her coat. The rain started around Midtown, not gradually, just suddenly present, heavy and relentless, the kind that makes Manhattan feel like it's been sealed shut. Clara had been looking out the window. She said it without planning to, that a former colleague had reached out, a position overseas, something she'd wanted before. She got 3 words in before the atmosphere in the car changed. "You're considering it." "I didn't say that. I said she..." "Are you?" Not a question. Something flatter than a question. "I don't know." She turned to look at him. His eyes were fixed on the road, jaw tight, hands on the wheel, in a way that had nothing to do with driving. "It was something I wanted before all of this. I'm just saying it exists." He didn't respond. The rain got louder. Then he signaled. No, he didn't signal, he just turned, pulled onto a side street and stopped the car. Cut the engine. The wipers made 3 more passes across the windshield, and then went still, and the rain came down on all sides like something that had been waiting for exactly this moment. He turned to look at her, and that was the thing she hadn't prepared for. Not the controlled exit she'd come to expect from him, not the jaw and the silence and the careful management. This was something else. His face, in the dark of the car with the rain surrounding them, was just open. Imperfectly, almost frighteningly open, like something had given way in him without permission and he hadn't yet decided whether to be angry about it. His hand came up slowly, palm against her jaw, thumb just under her cheekbone. The touch was so deliberate and so careful that she forgot briefly to breathe. He looked at her for a long moment. Just looked. Then he kissed her. It wasn't fast or desperate or anything she might have expected in some unexamined corner of her imagination. It was slow, heavy with everything that had been accumulating between them for months, almost every retreat, every flower with no card. She felt the weight of all of it in the careful way his mouth moved against hers. Her fingers found his lapel. She didn't remember reaching for it. When he pulled back, the rain was still there. Luna shifted in the back seat, the yellow ribbon sliding sideways, and resettled without waking. Arthur's hand was still at her face. His thumb moved, eyes barely once, and then his eyes dropped away from hers. He stopped, started again. That shouldn't have happened. She felt it go through her cleanly. "Okay," she said. "It didn't..." His hand dropped. He turned toward the windshield. "It didn't mean anything." She looked at his profile, the tension running down the side of his throat, the way his hands had found the steering wheel again, even though they were going nowhere, the slight unsteadiness in his jaw that he was working very hard to contain. She had things she could have said, a whole inventory of them. "Okay," she said again instead. She turned to the window, watched the rain distort the streetlights into long yellow smears on the glass. Felt something move through her chest and settle, not quite hurt, not quite the thing that comes before hurt. Something more tired than either. The specific exhaustion of having hoped carefully and been precise about it, and still ending up here. He started the engine. The drive home was quiet except for the rain. Luna slept the whole way, the yellow ribbon in her hair, one hand open on the seat between them, small, trusting, entirely unconscious of the silence filling the car around her. Clara kept her eyes on the window. She didn't look at him again. But in the dark of the car, reflected faintly in the glass, she could see his jaw still working, still trying, she thought, to swallow something down. Santorini in April didn't ease into you. It just arrived, white and absolute, the Aegean below in a shade of violet that looked digitally enhanced until you'd been staring at it long enough to accept it was simply real. The light did something unusual here, made things look heavier with meaning than they probably deserved. Arthur had rented a villa on the Caldera edge, rose bougainvillea climbing the stone walls, a terrace that dropped straight into the view, a pool that seemed to continue directly into the sea. The kind of place that cost what it cost and didn't apologize. Clara unpacked her single bag and stood at the terrace railing for a while and thought about nothing in particular. Things between them had been careful since the car, not hostile, just precise. The specific, exhausting precision of 2 people who've crossed into something and agreed wordlessly to act like they haven't. Arthur was present at meals now in a way he hadn't always been. He asked Luna about her drawings and waited for the full answer, and sometimes asked a follow-up question, which was new. He was doing something that looked almost like trying. He didn't touch Clara, didn't let his gaze settle. She matched it. Didn't see another option that preserved anything worth preserving. Luna treated Santorini as a research expedition. She wanted to know about the donkeys on the Fira path and why the houses were white and whether the tomatoes tasted different. Because they did, she was certain they looked different. She held Clara's explanation about heat and volcanic soil with the concentrated nod of someone taking notes. The first evening they walked the caldera path, all three of them. Luna between them with a hand in each without asking. The sky was doing something operatic behind the island, rose and deep amber, the kind of sunset that seems almost aggressive in its beauty. And Clara kept her eyes on it, and not on the specific fact of Arthur's hand 2 feet from hers, with nothing to close the distance but her own decision. Dinner was a terrace table above the water, candles, the sea going dark in slow degrees. Luna fell asleep before the food arrived, her head dropping sideways, with the absolute completeness only children manage. Arthur carried her in without making anything of it, came back, sat down. They ate. The candle moved in the wind off the water. Somewhere below, a boat crossed the dark with a single light. "You've been quiet," he said. "I'm usually quiet." "Not this kind." She looked at him across the table. The candlelight softened the geometry of his face. He looked, she thought, like someone who'd been arguing with himself for a long time and was getting tired of both sides. "I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing," she said. "Since the car, you haven't... I don't know what the rules are anymore." He was quiet. "That's not an answer." "I know." He picked up his wine. "Put it down." "I know it isn't." She looked back at the sea. It moved in long black swells far below, patient and enormous and completely disinterested in any of this. The marina was the second afternoon. She'd taken Luna down the stone path to look at the boats while Arthur finished a call. A man was there, Greek, somewhere in his 50s, the kind of weathered that comes from a life spent outdoors rather than from hardship. He had 2 of the boats. He showed Luna the knots in the rigging with genuine pleasure and let her hold a coil of rope and spoke to her in slow, careful English that she received with great seriousness. Clara was mid-laugh at something he'd said, a story about a particularly stubborn pelican at the harbour, when her attention shifted on its own. She turned. Arthur was at the top of the marina steps. Call apparently finished. He was completely still, hands in his pockets, eyes already on her from the distance, and she recognized the quality of that stillness. She'd last seen it on a narrow bridge in Venice, just before he'd said "it's cold" with a voice that had nothing to do with temperature. The boat owner kept talking, she kept responding, but she could feel Arthur coming down the steps, not hearing it exactly, just knowing. Some involuntary awareness she'd developed without permission. He reached her shoulder. The warmth of him was immediate in the sea air. Call ran over. He said it to no particular person. His hand touched the small of her back for just a moment as he settled beside her. Brief, not theatrical, they were barely visible to anyone, and disappeared. Her shoulders felt it for considerably longer than it lasted. The boat owner made his excuses with a warm smile. Luna had climbed onto something she absolutely should not be on, and Arthur reached her in 3 steps and lifted her down by the back of her jacket without breaking stride, and Luna said "Papa" with the full weight of profound injustice. He crouched to her level, used that different voice, the one that wasn't constructed, that just came out around her. Clara watched him from across the few meters between them, and at some point he glanced up and found her watching and held it for a moment that had no functional explanation. She was the one who looked away, that evening. Terrace, the sun making its final statement over the caldera, in colors that had no business being that saturated. She hadn't planned to say anything. It came out sideways. "You keep looking at me like that." He didn't ask, like what? Just waited. "Like you're deciding something, like I'm..." She stopped. "I don't know, it's been months of that look and I don't know what to do with it." The bougainvillea shifted against the stone wall. Below, the sea held its violet. "Clara." "No." Quietly. I'm not asking for anything. I just..." She pressed her fingers against the railing. "I can't keep losing my balance and pretending I didn't. It's starting to cost something." Silence. The real kind, not the managed kind. He turned to look at her, and she saw it, the fear, not of her exactly, of what wanting her meant, of what it would require him to survive if it went wrong. It was so visible for one moment that she almost looked away to give him privacy. "I know," he said, barely voiced. His hands were tight on the railing, not looking at the sea anymore, looking at her, actually looking, the way he so rarely let himself. It still wasn't enough. They both knew it. But it was the most honest thing he'd said in weeks, and the caldera spread wide below them in the dying light, and neither of them moved, and the space between them stayed exactly what it was. Small, uncrossed, unbearable. She found it by accident, which was somehow worse. A phone charger. That was all she'd been looking for in the small study off the villa's main room. The drawer stuck slightly, and when it finally opened, there was a photograph sitting on top of some folded papers, like it had been left there without much thought or with too much. A woman. Dark hair, a sundress, laughing at something happening just out of frame. The kind of laugh that wasn't performed for anyone. On the back, someone else's handwriting, not Arthur's, rounder, more careless, Sophia, Positano, 2019. Clara stood with the photograph in her hand for a moment. Then she put it back exactly where she'd found it. She read the emails anyway. She couldn't have explained the decision. They were printed correspondence from Arthur's lawyer, 2 years old, flagged with a paperclip, the language the kind of careful legal prose that wraps catastrophe in neutral phrasing, grief counseling. Unable to fulfill basic parental functions, Luna's welfare must remain the primary consideration. She stood in the study for a long time after. What she understood now that she hadn't before, Arthur hadn't simply grieved and moved on and arrived at coldness as a personality. He'd come apart. Documentably, officially, in ways that required courts and lawyers and intervention. The slow, reluctant thawing she'd been watching for months, the doorways, the flowers with no cards, the light under his office door. That wasn't just guardedness. That was a man who'd had to rebuild the most basic functions from the ground up, and was still quietly mid-construction. She put the papers back, closed the drawer, went to stand on the terrace in the Santorini morning, with the sea doing its enormous violet thing below, and felt something rearrange in her chest. Understanding why someone is broken is not the same as being able to fix them. She knew that. She'd always known that. But she'd let herself forget it somewhere between the winter garden and the coat on the balcony and the kiss in the rain. She didn't mention the drawer, but something had shifted in her expression and he felt it. She could tell by the way his attention moved over her at dinner that night, slower, more careful. He didn't ask. She didn't offer. They ate and talked about small things and went to their separate rooms, and she lay awake listening to the Aegean and thinking clearly, in the way you think when you've been avoiding something long enough that it stops waiting. Milan was 3 days later. One night, foundation dinner near the Duomo, then home. Luna stayed at the villa with Patricia, accepting this with the particular pragmatism of a child who has learned that adults sometimes disappear briefly for adult reasons. The city was grey and smelled of espresso and wet stone. The dinner was more subdued than Paris. Serious money, serious causes, less spectacle. Arthur worked the room with the efficiency of long practice. Clara held her own. They were, by any measure visible to others, convincing. Back at the hotel she packed before he did, which wasn't typical. Sat on the edge of the bed in her coat with her bag already at her feet, and the grey Milan morning coming through the curtains, and thought about Sophia laughing in Positano. About the clinical language of those emails. About the specific fear of loving someone who'd been so thoroughly destroyed by love once that he'd needed a court to notice. She'd looked up the overseas position on her phone the previous night, under the covers, while Arthur slept on the other side of the wall. It was still open. She'd stared at the screen for a long time before putting the phone face down on the mattress. She still didn't know what that meant. She was still not entirely certain when she got into the taxi. Malpensa was busy for a Tuesday morning. Families, business travelers, the specific low-grade stress of departures. Arthur was on a call near the check-in desks. Clipped Italian, the business register she'd never learned to follow. Clara bought a coffee, held it without drinking, stood in front of the departures board and found their flight. Then found, one row below it, the other one. He appeared at her shoulder when she was still looking at the board. "On time," he said. "I know." The coffee was getting cold in her hand. Around them, the airport continued, announcements echoing, a wheel on a suitcase that needed oil, a child insisting loudly on something. Clara, just that, her name, and then nothing. She closed her eyes for a half-second. "I found the photograph," she said, "in Santorini, the drawer, as it was an accident, but I read the emails too." She heard him go still beside her, the particular quality of his silence. "I understand more now." Her thumb pressed against the edge of her phone case. "About why you... I do understand it. I'm not saying that to be cruel." She paused. The words felt thin suddenly, inadequate to the weight she was trying to give them. "But I can't keep standing just close enough to almost matter. It's..." She stopped. "It started to cost me things." He turned toward her. And his face, she'd seen fragments of this before, small, unguarded moments, but never the full thing. Never, all at once. Something stripped back and unsteady and almost frightened. "I'm not asking you to..." "You don't ask me anything." Not anger, just the plain shape of it. "That's the thing, Arthur. You never do." The departures board refreshed. Their gate appeared. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its usual structure entirely. Lower, uneven at the edges. "The house doesn't work without you." A pause. His jaw moved. I can't say it better than that. I've tried. I don't work." She looked at him. At the effort those words had cost, visible in the set of his throat, the way his hands weren't quite steady at his sides. Her chest ached with how much she meant it. "That's not enough." Soft. "I know that's not what you want to hear, but it's not enough for me." Something crossed his face, fast, total, gone almost immediately, but she'd seen it, the full undefended second of it, before everything locked back into place. She picked up her bag. "I need someone who wants me, not someone who notices my absence." She said it carefully, not unkindly. "There's a difference." She walked, steady pace, shoulders level. She pressed her nails into her palm and focused on the gate number, and did not look back because she knew, with a certainty that felt like its own kind of grief, that if he was standing there looking the way he'd just looked, she wouldn't make it to the door. She sat at the gate, looked at the floor. Her phone buzzed. "Patricia. Luna keeps asking when you're coming home." I didn't know what to tell her. Clara turned the phone over on her knee, looked out the window at the flat grey sky over the tarmac, the planes sitting heavy and patient in the morning cold. She was not going to cry here. She decided that with some force. Behind her, somewhere in the airport, Arthur Whitmore was standing at a departures board, understanding something for the very first time. What it meant to need someone to stay and have no idea how to ask. He missed 3 board meetings in 1 week. Patricia flagged the first. The second she quietly rescheduled without mentioning it to him, something she'd never done in 4 years, and he didn't comment, which told her everything she needed to know. By the third, she'd stopped flagging entirely and started covering with the efficient private loyalty of someone who'd decided the reason was good enough. Arthur wasn't in Manhattan. He'd left 4 days after Milan. No fixed itinerary, which was so alien to his operating mode that his driver had asked twice to confirm the first destination. Rome, he'd followed a thread from something Clara had mentioned once, a residency program, a name. The coordinator had no record of her application. Dead end. Florence next. A professor she'd referenced in passing at dinner one night, months ago, the kind of detail he'd retained without intending to, not there either. He sat in a cafe near the Arno on a grey Tuesday afternoon, with an espresso cooling in front of him, and his phone open to their last conversation, her final message, sent from the Milan gate, just, "I'll be in touch about the contract terms," and he sat, with the particular discomfort of a man doing an honest accounting of himself, for possibly the first time in years. The inventory was long. It wasn't flattering. He called Patricia. She answered on the second ring. Luna asked about her again this morning. Before he'd said anything, like she'd been waiting, he pressed 2 fingers to his eyes. "I know." She set a place for her at breakfast, didn't explain it, just put the plate there and sat down. He had nothing to say to that. The image sat in his chest like something with weight. "Keep looking," Patricia said, and hung up. He found the thread in an old email. Clara had mentioned a friend once briefly, a woman from her graduate program who ran a small cultural foundation somewhere on the Ligurian coast. It was barely a lead. 3 words and a vague geography. He drove there anyway through roads that wound above the sea and required more focus than he had available, the coastline dropping away beside him in long grey sweeps he registered without seeing. The foundation was closed when he arrived. Locked, lights off, a handwritten note on the door about reduced winter hours. He sat in the car in the small gravel lot above the water and looked at the sea and tried to organize what he wanted to say. He had pieces. Things that had come up at 3 in the morning in 3 different hotel rooms. The image of Clara on the winter garden floor with Luna, writing those careful little labels, the music playing from her phone. Her face in the car after he'd said it didn't mean anything. Not hurt exactly. Worse than hurt. The expression of someone who'd decided to believe you. He checked into a village hotel, ate something forgettable, called Luna before her bedtime. She told him about a bird she'd seen from the villa terrace. Something with an unusual tail. She was very specific about the tail, and then went quiet in that particular way she had when she was deciding whether to say a thing. Papa. Careful, measured. Are you going to find Clara? He put his hand flat against the cold hotel window. Below, the village lights were small and scattered in the dark. Yes, he said. Luna was quiet for a moment that lasted longer than most silences. Okay, she said. Just that one word, in a voice that was 6 years old and somehow ancient. He stayed on the phone until she fell asleep. He found her the next afternoon through the friend, finally reached by phone after 2 failed attempts. There was a long pause on the line when he explained. He could hear the woman thinking. She asked me not to say anything. A beat. But she also talked about you for quite a while, so... The town was small and coastal and entirely uninterested in tourism, old stone buildings, a narrow main street that curved unexpectedly to reveal the sea. The library sat at the edge of it, modest, quiet, the kind of place that smelled of paper and wood and something faintly dusty that wasn't unpleasant. She was at a table near the window, laptop open, stack of books, a cup she'd long since stopped drinking from. She was reading with that particular focused stillness she brought to things, unaware, fully inside whatever she was looking at. He stood in the doorway. His jacket had been in the car for 6 hours. He hadn't shaved. He was aware of both things, with a detachment that surprised him. They seemed objectively like the least relevant facts about this moment. Clara looked up. Her face moved through several things in quick succession. Surprise first, genuine, unguarded. Then something careful closing over it. Then something underneath that. Something she pulled back before he could read it fully. He crossed the room, stopped at her table. The library was quiet enough that he could hear the faint sound of the sea through the old walls. I drove from Liguria, he said. It wasn't an opening. It was just the first true thing available. She looked at him steadily. How long? 3 hours. A pause. The views were... He stopped. Arthur. Completely irrelevant. I didn't see any of it. Something moved in her expression. She didn't speak. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down without asking. He knew it was presumptuous. He did it anyway. I've been afraid, he said, not performing the admission, just making it plainly, the way you say something when you've run out of reasons not to. For a long time, of exactly this, needing someone this much. His hands were on the table. He looked at them. Every time you were close enough, I found a reason to step back. I know that's what I did. I'm not... He exhaled. I'm not here to explain it. I'm here because I'm done doing it. She was watching him carefully, not warmly, carefully. There was a difference, and she was making it deliberately. The flowers, she said. Yes. The book outside my door. Yes. She looked at the table, then back at him, and then it didn't mean anything. I know. You broke something when you said that. Quiet. No drama in it. I'd been careful about wanting things. And then I wasn't careful, and you... She pressed her lips together briefly. You said that, And I believed you. That was the worst part. That I just believed you. The word sorry arrived in his throat and felt like it weighed something. I'm sorry, he said. For every time I made you feel like less, because feeling more frightened me. He looked at her directly. Sophia, I know about Sophia, soft. I found the emails. I know you did. He held her gaze. I came back from that, further than I thought possible, because of you, because of who you are with Luna, and who you are in that apartment, and who you are when you argue with me about the restaurant list. Something in his jaw tightened. I turned that into a reason to protect myself, instead of a reason to stay present. That was wrong. It cost you things it shouldn't have. The sea moved outside. The library held its particular quiet. Her hands were flat on the table. She wasn't moving toward him, wasn't moving away. He reached across, placed his hand over hers. No pressure, just contact. The way you set something down carefully. Come home, barely voiced. Not for the house. Not because things don't work without you, though they don't. His throat moved. Come home because I want you there. Because I should have said that simply and clearly 100 times, and instead I sent flowers with no cards like a coward. He paused. I'm saying it now, clearly. The afternoon light came through the library window, in long, flat angles across the old wooden floor. Clara looked at his hand on hers, looked at him. You drove 3 hours on coastal roads, she said. The GPS kept suggesting a faster route inland. Did you take it? No. The beginning of something crossed her face. Not a smile exactly. Something more complicated than that. Something that was still deciding what it wanted to be. Slowly, without making anything of it, she turned her hand over beneath his. Her fingers didn't close around his. Not yet. But they didn't pull away. The September light in Manhattan does something specific in the late afternoon, comes in lower than summer, more amber, lands on things at an angle that makes the ordinary look like it was placed there deliberately. Clara had always liked that about the city in fall, the way it made even familiar things feel worth noticing. The penthouse had changed. Same bones, the marble, the high ceilings, the windows that turned the city into a painting. But the winter garden had gone slightly wild at the edges, in the way of things that are genuinely being tended rather than maintained. Luna's drawings hung framed in the hallway now. Arthur had done that sometime in August without mentioning it, and Clara had walked past them one morning and stopped and stood there for a moment before continuing. The kitchen smelled of coffee before 7 most days, and something baked on Sundays and occasionally, when Luna had been left unsupervised near the spice rack, something genuinely unclassifiable. Clara had come back in June. Thursday. 2 bags. Luna had opened the door before she'd knocked. She must have been watching from the window, still in pajamas at 11 in the morning, star print, the same ones, and she'd looked at Clara with the expression of someone whose patience had been stretched to its outer limit. You're late, she said, then took her hand and walked her inside like the matter was settled. Arthur had been at the kitchen counter. He'd looked up, and something in his face had simply eased, like a thing that had been held too long finally being set down. Coffee? He said. Yes. And that had been most of it, really. No ceremony, no speech. Just the quiet beginning of something that had already been true for longer than either of them had admitted. What came after was slower, deliberately slower. Careful in the good way rather than the defensive way. A hand found in passing. Conversations that stretched past midnight at the kitchen island. The unhurried work of 2 people building trust without making a monument of it. Some evenings they sat in the winter garden with Luna, while she narrated the progress of each plant with the authority of a botanist, and nothing particularly significant happened, and it was, Clara thought, the best kind of evening there was. The party was Patricia's suggestion, which startled everyone, Patricia included. Small, she'd said. Terrace, late afternoon, people who'd been close enough to the year to deserve seeing where it landed. Clara had said yes immediately, before Arthur could locate an objection, which had become something of a dynamic between them. His instinct toward restraint, her instinct toward yes, the space between them where they'd learned to meet. Luna took complete creative control of the decorations. The result was string lights arranged in a pattern that obeyed no known principle of design and produced somehow exactly the right warmth. Roses on every surface, deep yellow, burgundy, and a pale champagne shade that Luna had selected after some deliberation because it was, she explained, the color of happiness. Clara had asked how she knew that. Luna had looked at her with the expression she reserved for questions she found slightly beneath her. The evening arrived soft and unhurried. Guests filtered in, the kind of small crowd that actually talks to each other. Luna moved through it with the social fluency of someone who had been attending adult functions in her imagination for years and was finally getting to practice. She introduced herself to everyone and asked questions that occasionally produced in the recipient a brief, visible recalibration. Arthur stayed near Clara, not attached, just nearby. His hand found the small of her back twice in passing, light and unremarked, the specific easiness of someone who has stopped performing the distance they no longer feel. She felt it both times, didn't look up, smiled at the person she was talking to, and kept it for herself. By 9, the crowd had thinned to the people who genuinely wanted to stay. The lights did their warm, structurally unsound thing overhead. Someone had put music on inside. Low, no particular genre, just sound that gave the silence somewhere to rest. Clara was at the terrace railing with half a glass of wine, the city spread out below in its usual indifferent glitter, when she felt him come to stand beside her. Not heard, just knew. That particular awareness she'd stopped trying to explain or dismantle. They stood quietly for a moment. Clara. She turned. He was just standing there, not arranged, not prepared, just him in the warm light holding something small in one hand. She looked at it. Her breath did something involuntary. Not a ring, a key, old, slightly ornate, hanging from a thin chain. Luna's idea, he said. The winter garden key. She thought you should have it. A pause. Properly. Not on loan. Clara looked at it in his palm. We had a conversation about it. Luna and I. His voice was doing the thing it did when he was navigating something carefully. Last week she asked me what you were to us. He stopped, something rerouted. I told her you were home. She said that was the correct answer and that I should tell you directly. She said that. Those words, she's 6, I genuinely don't know. Something pulled at the corner of Clara's mouth. I love you. Plain. No scaffolding around it, no qualifications, just the words, offered the way he'd been slowly learning to offer things. I should have said it a long time ago, more than once, without making you guess. I'm saying it now, and I'm going to keep saying it until it's not something you ever have to wonder about. The lights shifted above them in a small breeze off the Hudson. Clara took the key from his hand, felt the weight of it, genuinely small, genuinely old, genuinely the key to a room a little girl had unlocked and handed to her like a formal offering. I love you, she said. No performance, no hedge. He looked at her like someone who'd been waiting for impact so long that safety had become its own kind of disorientation. Then his hand came up to her face, palm against her jaw, that gesture, the one she'd first felt in a car in the rain a lifetime ago, and he kissed her, slow, unhurried, all the weight of everything that had preceded it, and none of the urgency, because they weren't going anywhere. When they separated, Luna was standing approximately 3 feet away with a small plate of something, watching them with the expression of a project manager at a successful completion. Finally, she said. Arthur looked at her. How long have you been there? She considered. A while. Luna. You were both very slow, she said, entirely serious. I want that acknowledged. Clara pressed her lips together and lost that particular battle completely. Arthur looked up at the sky, which was not technically a ceiling and didn't care about any of this, and exhaled the exhale of a man who has accepted his circumstances. Then he crouched down, and Luna walked into him, plate still carefully horizontal in one hand, and he held her with the easy sureness of someone who has remembered, after a long time away from it, how to hold the things that matter. Clara stood watching them in the warm light with the garden key in her hand. Arthur looked up, found her, and what was in his face was so uncomplicated and so completely his, no armor, no management, just him, that she felt it somewhere below language. She looked back the same way. Luna, from the depths of the embrace, said, "Can we get a dog?" "No," Arthur said. "Clara, we can discuss it." "That's yes," Luna told her father. "Informational, patient. It is not. It's yes, Papa. That's what discuss means." The lights moved overhead. The city hummed 40 floors below, and somewhere inside the perfectly ordinary noise of that moment, the argument about the dog, the warm string lights, the key still in Clara's hand, the three of them were, without any announcement, exactly what they'd been slowly, stubbornly, imperfectly becoming all year: a family. He had built walls so high, he'd forgotten there was something in him worth protecting. She arrived in a storm and stayed through every one that followed, not because she had to, but because something in her recognized something in him worth staying for. Love, it turns out, doesn't arrive with a declaration. It sets a place at breakfast for someone who isn't there yet. It writes labels on herb pots. It drives 3 hours on coastal roads and doesn't take the faster route. What would you be willing to cross the world for? If this story reached something in you, subscribe, leave a like, and tell me where you're listening from. Every comment reminds me why these stories are worth telling.